Okay. The purpose of this is to show you lots of 3GPP acronyms and just show that it's not just the radios. There's so much more going on in a LTE network, right? We talked about wireless a lot. We talked about the base stations, APs, and the devices. So that's really what's called as the radio access network layer. But on top of that, you have a core network that handles basically many of the data plane, control plane functionalities. It's generally called Evolved Packet Core, EPC. It has serving gateway, packet gateway type of functions for the data traffic. For control and signaling, there's MME, which is Mobility Management Entity, that handles also all the signaling, authentication, and so forth, leveraging the HSS, which is the home subscriber server, which is essentially all the SIM-based authentication and so forth. That's how it is generally handled as a technology, right? That is the EPC, and this is what operators use today. Now, on top of it, you have a lot of management-related stack and functions. There is the EPC management for all the EPC functions. There's element management system for the APs or the eNode Bs, base stations. PCRF, policy and charging rules function, handles the connectivity of applications for different services and what are the associated rules and access permits and so forth. Self-organizing networks handles the radio resourcement type of functionalities for all the base stations. And on top of that, you have the planning tools, the operations and business support systems, OSS, BSS, and overall subscriber management. So these are all the things that you need to run an LTE network. And operators, traditionally, they have a lot of manpower, a lot of resources, getting these different devices, these different functions from different vendors, and put together a solution, orchestrating all of these things. And what is needed now in an enterprise is for all of these things to come together, right? And this is obviously a challenge. Now, in a typical enterprise, you don't have all the resources to put all these pieces together. And even if you try, the cost will be very high. And what happens when you introduce a new function, new application, new service? Now you need to make changes on all of these different components. And at Celona, we are focusing on making this really enterprise grade and much simpler. But I'll leave it there. Maybe we'll go to the next one, next session, where Piyush is the expert in this field, putting all of these things together. He has a lot of experience from the field. So,
I think one of the reasons I think we really wanted Piyush to come is he was very early on starting to put together potential solutions using CBRS. As you talked about this journey a couple of times already. I remember in 2017 was the first time I was seeing Piyush trying to put together all of those components in various roles. And so I thought that his journey during this couple of years and what is involved in this could be really useful for us as background. So thank you, Piyush.
Yeah, thanks, Rajiv, for the great introduction. This is my first time. It's great. The discussions have been great. So I give you a little bit of a landscape from where I came from. I came from a licensed frequency world. I used to work for operators. Then I joined American Tower, which was a tower company, but I was a part of the business unit, which is anything other than tower, which is basically more in building. So the little bit of a landscape on how the licensed frequency world has worked is you have operators, which are mobile network operators that pretty much deploy, operate the spectrum. But then you have these, we call it middlemen, the neutral host operators, who basically give them access to the real estate where they can actually don't have access, like venues like malls, casinos, all that. They go out and deploy what they call distributed antenna systems in a traditional way, which is like in a sprinkler, you basically, operators bring their RAN and they connect to their distributed antenna system. The problem with that model was always been that operators have limited budget, so they cannot go out and invest everywhere. And that's why that model was not scalable. So when I looked at CBRS, I said, wow, this will work because this will allow other operators to go out and deploy networks where venue owner is willing to invest. And that's what the Wi-Fi has worked very well. Another challenge was, if you look at any venue in the enterprise world, you have a license frequency which run a completely different infrastructure and Wi-Fi which run a completely different structure. And that has been a big challenge because obviously the venue owner is already deploying Wi-Fi, somebody else is coming deploying cellular, which is two different things. So I think convergence of these two has also led to the CBRS world. That's where I think that brings a lot of efficiency. So I have been working on this since 2016. So I was like a 7th member in the alliance. And we were like, at that time, I was working for American Tower. And then now I moved and joined this company, which is more like a service provider in the enterprise space. And one of the things I feel is that why CBRS has advantage. Talking to a lot of customers, the problem is very similar, is like, how do I get connectivity inside the venue, a cellular like LTE like connectivity, which they can't without operators. So now they can go and deploy their own, or they can work with a managed services provider to do that, like similar to Wi-Fi. Now, another challenge is that Wi-Fi is great, it works very well, but then what about the other applications that they have, which is where LTE does very well. Having that quality of service brings then, and then the cost is a big thing. Today, if they have to go and deploy small cells for LTE from a license frequency or DAS, it's very expensive. So that makes it very easy now. The cost goes down, and the convergence of Wi-Fi and LTE happens in a common infrastructure, which is traditional switching infrastructure. One of the big challenges with the license frequency has always been the license frequency has been always is that the owners have no visibility to data. So anything that goes on the MNO's data, mobile network operators, they have zero visibility. And then how do you actually get new revenue streams for these venue owners? So for example, like in a stadium, believe it or not, they can now go and sell connectivity to a lot of their vendors using CBRS, using their point of sales and all that. So it's a great revenue stream generation for them. And yes, they could have done with Wi-Fi, but imagine now so much guest traffic goes on Wi-Fi. They want their fans to be on the Wi-Fi rather than selling it to the owner. So now they have this HOV lane, which is they can sell to different vendors. They come into the stadium. The same thing goes for casinos, any public venue. They can actually now monetize this network, which is a big thing now, which was not possible before with this. I will stop here. Any questions so far? So one of the things that we have been talking to a lot of venue owners, everybody has different applications. I will say these are the killer applications which we taught that, okay, can lead to selling this into the venues, is push to talk. Like, if you believe it or not, that if you remember in Las Vegas, there was a shooting happened. And that the people are in the MGM, the shooter was in the MGM casino. And what happened was, at that time, the people inside the casino workers, they were using Verizon LTE because Mendeley Bay or MGM has contract with Verizon. They could not reach each other. They could not make a call. The network was completely blocked. The capacity was off the roof. And one of the things that come out of that is like, wow, you depend so much on the public network. Now, if you have a private network, like a push-to-talk, that is dedicated capacity for the people who are the employees of the casino. So that's, we think, is a killer application. With Motorola coming out with the whole push-to-talk phone has been a great thing. Point of sale. In a stadium, believe it or not, people use Verizon or AT&T, but all the people using LTE, it's very hard to get capacity. Even getting a 100 kbps is very hard. So having that dedicated network or private network for point of sale, and this is all in lieu of handheld devices, because we all know handheld devices is going to take 2-3 years by the time the 60% penetration reach happens. So in lieu of all this, how do you sell? Cameras. There are hundreds of cameras out there in the venues. Right now, they run on wired. It's very expensive to run every camera on the wired. There are places they want to do wireless, but obviously requires bandwidth. Even at your home, connecting a Ring camera outside, I just did that, and the Wi-Fi signal was weak, and it was hard for me. I have to go and put the access point somewhere so I can have the ring cam, because it takes so much bandwidth out of it. And then digital signage. A lot of the digital signage is, I didn't realize that, but they don't keep it in a single place. They are movable. They are not stationary. So they move from one place to another. Imagine they have to run all the cable modem, and then they have to move that somewhere else. It's a lot of expense. Now you can do wirelessly, putting a USB dongle or something and run through private LTE. And the same thing with building automation and all that. What we realize is like these are the killer apps that today, next 2 years, I can go out and sell till the devices comes in. This is where the value comes from, the business value for the venue owners, for them to buy in lieu of devices. Any questions?
I think all this, aside from the life and limb critical services, though, are all predicated on the assumption that total cost of the solution is less than paying for your Verizon bill.
Yeah.
Right. So I think I'll be interested to see what sort of the total cost of what the all-in looks like based on a solution, especially when I can go buy a Cradle Point with Verizon and drop it in. Where's the return on that investment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
CBRS can become cost effective where LTE doesn't.
Yeah, so I think the key to that is, I think somebody asked that question about overlaying Wi-Fi overlay over CBRS. I think the cost has to be very aligned with Wi-Fi, the total cost of ownership. And the challenge has been with LTE always has been the total cost of ownership has been much higher than Wi-Fi. But now with mentioning like somebody mentioned the name of one of the player who has come from the Wi-Fi world and are trying to come into LTE world, and other players, if you have to use a traditional architecture, which you can just add on Wi-Fi, a CBRS to it. If you try to run a separate infrastructure and try to add a completely, and then go the LTE route that was before, then it becomes expensive. So you're right, the cost is a big thing. If the cost is the ROI is not there, this is not going to work. The TCO has to be very close to Wi-Fi. And that's very critical. And so far we have seen it is, if you overlay both at the same time, you put a converged network where you Wi-Fi and then you add on CBRS, it's kind of, the cost aligns very close to Wi-Fi.
I just have a question on that last slide. On the right side, your apps and devices. Wouldn't this ROI be much easier to hit if my phone was a client device?
It will. It will, and I think, but what it will take time, because let's say handhelds are coming out this year. I take a very conservative estimate, 30% turnover. The refresh rate is 30% per year over year. So let's take 2021. You will be more like 60%, and I think that time it's going to be an easy sell. But till then, obviously, you have to put other value around it. But it's not just the handset, but I think all these different devices can allow it to scale in the next 2 years.
By the fact that you mentioned that you could monetize this, I'm assuming there are some sort of granular controls in place to prohibit just Joe user from walking into an environment with CBRS and connecting his device, even though he may not be an employee or member of the organization?
In a private network, yes. I mean, the authentication will control that. He cannot just get on a private.
And that authentication is via SIM, like AKM or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the interesting thing about LTE is because it's SIM-based auth, that concept of somebody just coming and attaching to the network is not really feasible because everything from even system selection is coming from the SIM.
Well, so that's, from an enterprise use case perspective, enterprises are interested in connecting devices.
Yeah.
Sometimes the interest is in connecting devices that they don't own, right? I'm thinking transient guest services in the basement of a hospital is the traditional use case, right? How do we take CBRS and fill that use case if you must have SIM authentication and you don't know who's coming into your network?
Right.
Yeah.
It's the opposite use case of what Scott's talking about.
And I think it is somewhat about what Mehmet was describing as those two consumption models.
Yeah.
I think the model that you're describing is the so-called neutral host model, which is probably going to come later. Whereas today, what is best suited for is what I would call the enterprise device model, where enterprises' own devices are supported on their own network. And that's the kind of use cases that you're seeing up there, rather than ideally that would also work. But I think there's probably more ecosystem work to happen before
Yeah.
that happens, including.
I mean, the technology is there, just maybe just to add to
Yeah.
that, it's both LTE networks, right? This roaming, the technology enables roaming from one LTE network to another LTE network. It's essentially really decision by the mobile network operators to enable this kind of service for their devices.
I think it's going to be a critical differentiation, especially as you try to take LTE and adapt it into the enterprise, because they don't think like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's ultimately what you're saying, right?
Exactly, yeah. They don't definitely think
That's
like
right.
that, yeah.
Sorry, there was a point
Just to
there.
add to what Rajiv said, I think in the future, we'll also be seeing use of things like eSIMs as it's being proposed for the 5G standard.
That's right.
Once that comes about, then
Yeah.
the problem of distribution. I'm sorry. Hi, can you hear me now? Yeah. Yeah, so I was trying to say that the eSIM concept, which is being proposed for 5G, doesn't have to wait for 5G. It can equally be applied to this, right? So that way, you're not really physically distributing a SIM in your hospital basement usage case. As soon as people come in there, it's like a digital certificate. They can get the eSIM, and they can start using that.
I'm just wondering when we get a captive portal on.
I was going to say onboarding.
Yeah, onboarding.
Where's the clear pass for CBRS?
Well, and that's exactly the point, right? We talk about Passport and Wi-Fi
Yeah.
networks as this bridge,
Yeah.
right? This authentication bridge. And when we're adapting this SIM concept that's built into the technology, I think eSIM then is the answer, right? Is that?
I think it's one of
eSIM
the
is one answer. It's
think
one
it's
of the
answers.
Having the ability to roam from a private
Yeah.
to a
Yeah.
public, I mean, that's
Yeah.
going to be the big.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But the new
Yeah.
proposed concept that they
I think there are a few technological solutions out there, Sam, to be honest with you. And I think the question is, when do the players come together to agree to it? This is more of that issue, as we all know, more than a
Exactly.
technology issue. But sorry, I wanted to go to the.
So far, all we've talked about for design is overlay and boiling it down to that. At any point today, will you guys be talking about any kind of design and verification methodology? What goes into designing this from the RF perspective?
We're going to do it in the off-the-camera demo that we're going to do that.
Okay.
We're going to talk a little bit about our company's thoughts on that. Predominantly, what we have tried to do so far is keep it to the technology. Just as.
One AP per room, Lee.
Yeah, and I think where I get really excited and worried is like being that LTE has always been managed by operators, mobile network operators. They have large teams, engineering teams, NOC teams, and all that. And still, I feel that there is CBRS is great, all the things, but still it's LTE. It has some complexity, which a lot of the managed services provider like us or everybody has not been exposed to in a real world. And I feel that being that it requires an EPC, what Mehmet was mentioning, you need interoperability. If you look at the mobile network operators, they have traditionally used two key vendors, Ericsson, Nokia, Ericsson in the Ericsson market, Nokia in the Nokia market. But now you're talking about interoperability, managing that, having those big labs. I think the economics becomes a little complicated if you start put up a team like operators, like engineering, design, operations, all that. It becomes very expensive. Then how are you going to offer those services at the same cost as Wi-Fi? And that's a big challenge. And I see that there is one threat of scaling CBRS is the operational challenge of how many managed services provider can you make it. The success of CBRS or private LTE will come from Wi-Fi like simplicity and Wi-Fi like economics. If those two can happen in an LTE in a CBR, that's the scale happens. And I feel that that's where the challenge, like right now, there is no platform that allows you to connect to multiple vendors and make it technology vendor agnostic. You have to go to the EMS system of Nokia, you have to buy EMS of Ericsson. Now imagine if I'm a managed services provider in the business, I have to train people on Nokia, train people on Ericsson, train people on Rock, or whatever systems they have. But is the platform that basically shields you from all that complexity and basically gives you a very seamless view of what's going on in the world and you can manage it. I think that scares a lot of people, a lot of MSPs. And then the regulatory stuff. Although it's easy, GA is easy, all that, but still understanding spectrum. There's still regulations that you have to go by, making sure all the reporting happens to FCC, making sure you understand that what's the difference between GA and PAL is, when you get GA, all that. and then making sure that you have installers who are certified to go and install. So I think there is some complexity that needs to be taken into account, and there's a very operationally sensitive. That's the only way you can scale is if you overcome all these complexities around it.